The dark comes early in late November. By 5 in the morning it is still full night outside these windows, and the fields are just shapes I know from memory rather than from sight. The long run of the east field, the woodlot ridge, and somewhere past that, the lower 11 acres where the creek is running again. I can hear it if I'm very still. I couldn't hear it 2 years ago. That means something to me that I haven't yet found words enough for, and I've had 50 years of practice finding words. Both notebooks are on the table in front of me. Mine is on the left, a brown cloth-bound ledger, the fifth one since 1941. Its spine held with electrical tape I wrapped around it sometime in the spring of 1988. On the right is the other one. Leather cover, dark as old tobacco. The corners soft from handling. Not my handling. I've been careful with it. Soft from someone else's hands, across a span of years I wasn't alive for yet. I want to tell you about how I came to sit here with both of them. In March of 1989, I bought 114 acres of land on Sycamore Creek Road, 7 miles outside Millhaven, in Harlan County, Ohio. I paid $31,400 for it at a county tax lien auction on a Thursday morning, the 8th, with sleet coming sideways off the fields, and the county auctioneer looking at me the way men have looked at me my whole life. When I do something they've decided I shouldn't be able to do. The land hadn't been worked since 1949, 40 years. The farmhouse had been standing empty since the autumn that the man who built it, who farmed it alone, who wrote down everything he knew in the book now sitting to my right, walked off it for the last time and didn't come back. 40 years of weather and silence, and nobody caring enough to tend it. 2 other men bid against me that morning. Neighbors. I know them both. They stopped at $30,000 and change, and I kept my hand up, and the auctioneer knocked it down to me with an expression like he was watching someone sign away their own savings at a carnival. Everyone in Harlan County had an opinion about what I'd done. Most of the opinions were the same opinion, stated with varying degrees of politeness. I was 77 years old. I had 60 acres of my own already, just to the west, that I'd been running alone since my husband died in November of 1986. A woman my age had no business taking on a ruin. I've been a woman my age my whole life. I've never once found it to be the obstacle other people assumed it was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The light won't be up for another hour, and I have time enough to tell this the right way, from the beginning. The auction was held in the Millhaven Municipal Building, the one on Court Street with the radiators that knock and hiss all winter and never quite warm the room. It was a Tuesday, the 14th of March, 1989, and the snow that had fallen the week before was still crusted along the north-facing curbs, gray and granular, the kind that refuses to leave. I arrived at 8:30. The auction wasn't until 9. I sat in the second row with my coat on, because the radiators were losing that morning. There were 11 properties on the block. The Sycamore Creek Road parcel was listed 7th. I had read the county assessor's description so many times by then that I could have recited it. 114 acres, mixed field and woodlot, legal access via Sycamore Creek Road, improvements including 1 frame dwelling, 1 bank barn, 1 outbuilding, condition unknown, no utilities confirmed active. Delinquent taxes accumulating since 1974. Minimum opening bid set at $22,000. The auctioneer was a man I'd seen at every farm sale in the county for 20 years. Heavy-set, reading glasses on a cord around his neck, voice like a radio left on in another room. When the Sycamore Creek parcel came up, and he read the description and looked out at the room for opening bids, I put my hand up. He saw me. He paused. Just a half beat, not long enough to be rude, and said, "We have 22,000. 2 men across the aisle raised their paddles almost immediately. I know them. They farm east of Millhaven, brothers-in-law, and they had no use for that land. What they had use for was the sport of it, the story they'd be able to tell at the feed store on Saturday morning. They ran me to 29.5, 1 increment at a time, watching me the way men sometimes watch old women, with a patience that mistakes itself for kindness. At 30,000 they slowed. At 31 they stopped. I raised my hand at 31,400, and the room was quiet, and the auctioneer looked at the two men, and they shook their heads, and he brought the gavel down. The sound of it carried. I signed the transfer paperwork at a folding table in the hallway. The county clerk, not the one I came to know later, but a younger man, slid the deed copy across the table without much ceremony. My hand was steady. I have always had steady hands. I drove out there alone that afternoon, 7 miles on 68 East, and then the turn onto Sycamore Creek Road, which is barely a road, more of an agreement between two fields. The F-100's tires found every rut. The bare elms on either side of the lane were still a month from leafing out, and through them I could see the farmhouse set back from the road, the barn behind it, the sky above the barn wide and pale and cold. I pulled up to the gate and sat with the engine running. The gate latch was a piece of wire looped over a fence post, the kind a man puts up when he means to replace it and never does. I unwound it with my gloves on and pushed the gate open and walked up to the front door without the truck. The lane in was soft from the March thaw, and my boots sank a half-inch with every step. The porch had gone. Not entirely. The south end still held, the boards gray and punky but upright, but the northeast corner had dropped, the post rotted through at the base, and the porch roof above it had tilted and pulled away from the house fascia, leaving a gap you could put your fist through. I stepped around it and tried the door. It was unlocked. It had been unlocked for 40 years, most likely. There was nothing in it anyone had wanted. The front room smelled of cold plaster and something deeper, mouse and old wood and the particular damp that gets into a house when no one is breathing inside it anymore. The windows faced west and south, and every pane was fogged with oxidized grime, the kind that doesn't clean from the outside because it has grown from the inside, moisture working back and forth across the glass for decade after decade until it clouded over like a cataract. The light that came through was pale and diffuse and gave the room the feeling of being underwater. There was a calendar on the kitchen wall. I noticed it from the doorway before I noticed much else. A small square calendar, the paper kind that feed companies used to give out at the start of each year, and it was open to October 1949. The top half was a drawing of a barn in autumn colors, the kind of generic pastoral that looked good enough in the moment and means nothing now. And the bottom half was the month, and a few of the days had pencil notations I couldn't read from where I stood. I didn't touch it. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something that has been waiting. I am not a woman who frightens easily in a ruin. A ruin is just a building that has been honest about what it is. I walked the downstairs rooms, the front room, the kitchen, the small room off the back that might have been a pantry or a bedroom, and I measured with my eyes and counted what needed doing, and did not grieve for the state of things. What I do in abandoned places is look. I look the way you look when you suspect something is not where it appears to be. It was in the front room that I felt it. The east wall, the interior one, the wall shared with nothing outside. It was thicker than it had any business being. Not by much, but I have been touching walls my whole life, and I know what a wall is. The east wall stayed in my mind through all of March and most of April. I did not open it. I had other work to do first, and I have learned, over a long life on old land, that the thing you want most deserves to be the last thing you reach for. April on that property was mud season, which meant I spent the better part of 3 weeks on the roof before I spent a single day inside. The ridge beam on the south slope had sagged 4 inches and taken 6 courses of shingles with it, and I patched it with rough-cut oak I hauled from my own woodlot in the back of the F-100, 2 boards at a time, because I could not lift more than that alone. The teenage boy from the Reinhardt place a mile down Sycamore Creek Road, 16, long-armed, willing, came Saturdays when his father could spare him. He didn't talk much, which I appreciated. He carried what I pointed at and held what I handed him, and did not ask me why I was doing any of it, which is more than I can say for most grown men. By late May I had a sound roof, repointed stone along the foundation's east face, and a kitchen floor that would hold weight without complaint. I stripped the front room lath in June, working from the ceiling down, pulling each strip cleanly at the nail rather than splitting it, because old lath is worth keeping if you take it right. The smell of old plaster is something you either know or you don't. It's horsehair and lime and thyme, which is to say it smells like the inside of something that has been closed for longer than you've been watching it. I was working the east wall on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week of July 1989. I have it written in my own notebook, the date and the temperature, 81 degrees at 2 in the afternoon, when my pry bar went behind a lath strip and stopped. Not caught. Stopped. The way a bar stops when it meets something deliberate rather than something accidental. I worked the strip loose from both sides and pulled it away, and then I saw it, the corner of a tin canister set flush into the plaster, wrapped in something dark and folded. I did not pry it out right away. I set down the bar. I stood there in the heat and the plaster dust, my hands still, and looked at it. Then I carried it to the porch. I sat down on the top step in the afternoon light. The light was long and yellow the way it goes in late July, slanting from the west, and I set it on the boards between my feet and looked at what it was. A tobacco tin, Edgeworth Ready Rubbed, the red letters still legible under a film of grime. The oilcloth it was wrapped in was stiff but unbroken. Whoever put it there had meant it to last. I unwrapped it slowly. The lid came off with a sound like a small held breath released. Inside the oilcloth, tied with a length of waxed cord that had gone brittle but held, was a book, not large, maybe 6 inches by 4, maybe 1.5 inches thick. Leather cover, dark brown gone nearly black at the corners, the grain worn smooth where a hand had held it thousands of times. I untied the cord carefully, the way you'd untie something you might want to tie again, and I opened it. The handwriting was small and slanted left, pencil pressed hard into the page. A man who had learned to write when pencils were not wasted. The first entry was dated April 9th, 1923. Cold still. Ground not ready. Check the lower field. Run is up 4 inches from last week. We'll wait. I read the first page standing on the porch. Then I sat back down and read the next 3, and by the time the light had shifted, I had been there an hour. I took it inside that night and set it on the table. I did not rush it. I read maybe 30 pages the first evening, another 40 the second, the rest on the third night, the nights of July 14th, 15th, and 16th, 1989, if you want the dates. And I kept them in my own notebook because already I understood this was something that ought to be tracked. He was a dry writer. Not cold. Dry. The way a man gets when he has done enough living that sentiment feels like something to ration. He wrote about his equipment without sentimentality, and about the weather without complaint, and about the neighbors without malice, mostly. His wife appears in the early pages the way a person appears who is simply there, mentioned in passing the way you mention a sound you've always heard. She put up the last of the beans today, a good year for beans. Then March 1931, a single line. She is gone, ground still frozen. He did not write again for 11 days. When he did, he wrote about the creek. He called it Painter's Run because of something his father had told him. A painter cat, what some called a mountain lion, had been seen drinking there in 1887. I don't know if that's true. He wrote it as fact. What I noticed, slowly, over those 3 evenings, was that every few pages the writing changed register. The daily entries, what got planted, what broke, what the price of corn was doing, would give way to something more deliberate. Careful sketches, hand-drawn, of the creek's path through the lower acreage. Water levels noted with a consistency that was not casual. Seasonal marks, year after year, sometimes 2 or 3 notations in a single month. He had been measuring something, watching something, recording it with the patience of a man who believes the record will outlast him. By the third night, I had stopped reading it as a story. I had started reading it as a document. The next morning, I took the journal out to the lower field. I had not walked that ground carefully since I bought the place. I had walked it once in April, soon after the auction, just to see what I had. The sumac had come in thick, 6, 7 feet in places, and the soil where the field should have opened up toward the property line was soft in a way that suggested old water memory, the kind of ground that had been wet for a long time, and remembered it even after it dried out. I had noted it and moved on. There was too much else to do that spring. Now it was late July. The sumac was at its fullest. I wore his barn coat even in the heat because the branches were thick enough to scratch, and I carried the journal open to the page he had drawn in the summer of 1934, the clearest of his maps, the one where he had marked the creek's path with a steady hand and noted the flow rate in what I had come to understand was his shorthand, a fraction, numerator and denominator, volume and time. I found it in 20 minutes. The bed was there exactly where he had drawn it, bone dry. The sumac had colonized the center of it, roots splitting down into the old channel, but the shape of the ground didn't lie. A shallow depression running east-southeast, maybe 4 feet wide, cutting through the lower acreage just as his pencil had said it would. I walked it slowly, the journal open in one hand, matching the bends in the bed to the bends in his map. They matched the way a key matches a lock. He had been precise. He had been watching this for 26 years, and he had drawn it true. I followed the dry bed to the property line. The sumac thinned there. The ground rose slightly, and where it rose, someone had poured concrete. A head wall, maybe 3 feet wide, 1.5 feet tall, set into the earth at the exact point where the creek would have crossed onto the neighboring parcel. A drainage tile inlet, the pipe running east, into ground that was not mine. The concrete was old, but not that old. Not 1923. Not anything close to what was in his maps. I stood there for a while. I am not a woman who raises her voice. I learned a long time ago that anger spends itself in the air if you let it out too fast, and then you have nothing left when you need it. So I stood at that concrete headwall in the July heat, with sumac pressing against my legs and the journal open in my hand, and I looked at the pipe running east, and I did not say a word. But I understood, then, why he had sealed the journal in the wall. He had known something was coming. He just hadn't lived long enough to stop it. I drove back up the hill in the heat of that afternoon, with the journal in my lap and the windows down, and I did not go inside when I reached the house. I sat on the porch steps for a long time, watching the tree line where the lower field ended, thinking about concrete and pipe, and a man who had sealed his records in a wall before he walked off his own land for the last time. The land buyer arrived on a Tuesday in May, 3 weeks after I'd found the head wall. I remember the day clearly because I had been up since 4:30 turning compost, and I was not in any mood to be polite, beyond what was necessary. He came in a white sedan with Columbus plates, wearing a sport coat despite the warmth, and he walked up to the porch with his hand extended and his voice already going, the smooth, cheerful voice of a man who has already decided the meeting is a formality. He had done his arithmetic. He told me so. He said he understood I had paid $31,400 at the tax auction, and that he wanted to offer me $44,000, which he described as a fair price for a property in this condition, on this road, in this market. He said condition and road and market, the way certain men say things they expect you not to understand. I invited him in for coffee. It is the thing my mother always did, and her mother before her, and it buys a woman time to think without appearing to think. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the walls the way buyers do, making calculations he believed I couldn't see. He mentioned the roof. He mentioned the overgrowth on the lower field. He said something about the creek bed being dry, which told me exactly how much he knew and exactly how much he was hoping I didn't. He said he could close in 30 days, no contingencies, and that at my stage of life, a clean exit was worth something. At my stage of life, I poured the coffee. I said I appreciated him coming out. I said I would think on it. He left his card on the table, a cream-colored card with his name and a Columbus address, and he shook my hand again on the porch with the particular warmth of a man who believes he has already won. I watched the white sedan go down Sycamore Creek Road until the dust settled back into the gravel. That evening, I built a small fire in the wood stove, the way I do in May when the nights still carry a chill off the fields. I held his card for a moment, good stock, embossed lettering, and I set it on the coals and watched it curl. The journal was on the shelf above the window. I had begun reading it from the beginning by then, all 26 years of it, and I had only just reached 1931. By August, I had read the journal twice through. The second reading took longer than the first, because by then I had learned to slow down at the water pages. He drew them in the margins, tight little pencil sketches, the creek's path marked with a dashed line, the seasonal levels noted in a column beside each drawing. April high, 14 ins, bank, July low, 6 inches bank, October, running clear. 26 years of that. I sat at the kitchen table with a magnifying glass my husband had used for reading seed catalogs, and I went through every one. I did not know what I had. I knew it meant something. That is a different thing from knowing what. On a Tuesday in the second week of August, I put the journal in a paper grocery sack, drove the 7 miles into Millhaven in the F-100, and parked on the square. The courthouse was a limestone building from 1887, with ceiling fans that turned slowly and changed nothing about the heat. I asked at the front desk for the records office. She was sitting behind a counter stacked with deed boxes, a woman older than I was, which I did not expect. She had white hair pinned flat and reading glasses on a chain, and she was writing something in a ledger with the careful pace of a person who has never once been in a hurry because she has always known exactly what needed doing. She had been in that building since 1941. You could see it in the way she occupied the space, the way the room seemed to have been built around her rather than the other way around. I set the journal on the counter. I told her where I had found it and in what. I told her about the water drawings. She put down her pen. She opened the journal to the first water page and looked at it for a long time without speaking. She turned to the next and the next. She went through perhaps a dozen of them before she took off her glasses, let them hang on the chain, and looked at me directly. She said, "Painter's Run crossed that lower field under prior use for at least 26 years of documented record, continuous, seasonal, notated. Under Ohio riparian law, that establishes an easement that cannot simply be absorbed by a neighbor without adjudication." She said, "If that creek no longer runs there, someone moved it without legal authority." She said it the way old women say true things. Not with drama, not with emphasis, just with the flat weight of something that has always been so and was only waiting to be named. I asked her what that meant in practical terms. She put her glasses back on. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from beside her ledger. She said, "It means we need to look at the deed records for the parcel to the east, and it means you may want to speak with someone at the county prosecutor's office before you do anything else." The work that followed was slow work, and I was grateful for that. I have never trusted anything that moved fast. A fence post driven in a hurry leans by spring. Ground turned before the frost is ready heaves all winter. The truth inside a courthouse record room is no different. It has to be coaxed out by someone willing to come back again and again until it gives. I drove into Millhaven on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 7 miles of dirt road, and then county blacktop, the F-100 loud in the cold air of that first autumn. I would park behind the courthouse, walk in through the side door that the records clerk had unlocked for me by the time I arrived, and we would sit together in the back room where the deed books were stored on open wooden shelves, the oldest ones wrapped in brown paper to keep the bindings from cracking further. She knew where everything was. She had been arranging those shelves since 1941. What we found came slowly, in pieces, the way most true things do. The drainage tile permit was filed in March of 1962 with the county engineer's office. It authorized the neighboring landowner, the parcel to the east, 203 acres then, 211 by the time I bought next door, to install a subsurface tile system for the stated purpose of improving drainage on his south field. The permit described the tile route. It did not mention Painter's Run by name. It did not disclose that the tile system would intercept the creek's natural channel and redirect its flow entirely onto the eastern parcel. That omission was either careless or deliberate, and after 48 years of watching people manage paperwork, the records clerk had a quiet opinion about which. What was missing was the easement notation. When land changes hands and a watercourse crosses it, the easement, the right of that water to continue crossing, should transfer with the deed or be separately recorded. In the deed chain for my 114 acres, going back through 4 tax lien transfers and 1 estate sale between 1949 and 1989, there was no easement notation for Painter's Run at any point. It had been dropped. Not contested, not adjudicated, not legally extinguished. Simply dropped, the way a tired man sets something down on the way out the door and no one picks it up again. The records clerk made notes in a precise hand on a yellow legal pad. She dated each entry. She cited each document by volume and page number. She worked with the same unhurried attention she must have brought to that room every morning for nearly 50 years. By July of 1990, we had the full picture assembled on paper. He came back in January of 1991. I was in the barn when I heard the car on the gravel, that particular sound a city vehicle makes on a dirt road, too careful, too measured, like it knows it doesn't belong. I finished checking the water in the stock tank before I went out to meet him. I was not in a hurry. He had driven 2 hours from Columbus in weather that had no business asking it of anyone, and I thought he could wait 2 more minutes. He had a surveyor's report this time, a proper-looking document, bound in a blue cover, with the county seal on the first page. He handed it to me, the way men sometimes hand women things they expect not to be read, extended at arm's length, held by the corner, as though the gesture itself were the point. I read it standing in the yard, in the cold, taking my time with each page. The report noted the absence of active surface water on the lower 11 acres. It described the drainage conditions of that field in language that was technically accurate and carefully incomplete. It did not mention Painter's Run by name. It did not discuss where that water had gone or whose land it was currently crossing. What it said, between its careful lines, was that my lower acreage had a water problem that a buyer would need to account for. He offered $61,000. I handed the survey back to him and said no, the same as I had in May of 1989, though this time I did not feel the same small chill I'd felt then. That chill had belonged to a woman who wasn't entirely sure of herself yet. This was different. What I understood, standing there in the January wind, was that he already knew about the creek. Somebody in the county had been talking, at the feed store, at the courthouse, at the diner counter where news moves faster than the newspaper. He had shaped his offer around what he knew, which meant the survey wasn't information. It was a warning, dressed up as paperwork. I had filed the quiet title action in Harlan County Common Pleas Court the previous September. The records clerk had helped me assemble the documentation, the journal's water maps, the deed chain annotations, the volume and page citations she had gathered across those months of careful afternoons. The filing was 12 pages. Every fact in it had a source. Every source had a date. He didn't know that yet. Or perhaps he did, and the 61,000 was his last reasonable number before things became unreasonable. Either way, he drove back down Sycamore Creek Road the same way he'd come, carefully, like he didn't quite trust the ground beneath him. The court issued its confirmation in March. The court order came by registered mail on a Tuesday in March, and I set it on the kitchen table and did not open it for an hour. I made coffee. I stood at the window and watched the bare elm at the edge of the yard. Then I sat down and read it twice through, slowly, the way you read something you have been waiting a long time to read. They rerouted the drainage tile in April. I watched 2 county workers with a backhoe spend the better part of a morning undoing what had taken someone an afternoon to do in 1962. By noon, the ground was open in a long, shallow seam across the fence line. By 3 o'clock, Painter's Run was moving again. thin at first, tentative, the way water moves when it has forgotten the shape of a channel. I stood at the top of the lower field and watched it find its old path through the sedge grass, spreading into the flat ground at the bottom of the 11 acres. It knew where to go. Water always does. I planted corn on the first Saturday in May. I was out before sunrise with the Farmall 560, the diesel cold in the early air, knocking and then catching, then settling into the low idle I had known for 18 years. The field behind me opened dark and straight in the first light. I did not call anyone. I did not think there was anyone to call. The work was its own company, the seat vibrating under me, the smell of turned earth, the row markers leaving their small pressed lines in the soil. 41 years since anyone had worked that ground. It received the seed without complaint. By August, the stalks were past my shoulder. I walked the lower field on a still morning when the corn was head high, the tassels just coming out, and I thought about the man who had last farmed it, his careful notations, his hand-drawn maps, his sealed tin in the east wall. He had known what the creek was worth. He had written it down in a tight pencil hand and hidden it inside the plaster, because he understood that a record, kept honestly and long enough, becomes a kind of argument no one can answer. I had only done what he had already taught me to do. Write it down, keep it, trust that the right day would eventually come. The field ran to the tree line, green and orderly, the creek moving along the south edge, with a quiet persistence that did not care whether anyone was watching. I watched. I have always been better at watching than people give me credit for. It is late November now. The fields are bare. I am sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, the 4th of November, 1991, with a cup of coffee I have let go cold because I forgot to drink it. The window above the sink faces east, and the sky is the color of old pewter. The kind of sky that means snow is thinking about coming but hasn't decided yet. The corn was cut in September. The lower field is stubble and turned earth, resting the way good ground rests, not empty, just still. Above the kitchen window, on the narrow shelf where I have always kept the things that matter most to me, there are 2 notebooks. Mine is a black composition book, the kind with the mottled cover, 49th volume in a series that started the November I turned 30. Beside it sits a leather-bound book in a brown paper sleeve, 200 pages written in a tight pencil hand by a man I never met, beginning in the spring of 1923 and ending in the autumn of 1949. They look like what they are, a life's work, set down honestly, kept long enough to become an argument no one could answer. I want to say something to you now, and I want to say it plain. People will tell you that old means finished. They will look at the age in your hands and decide, before you have opened your mouth, that you are past the point where your knowing counts for anything. I have sat across the table from men like that. I have watched them calculate what they thought they saw. A widow, a small farm, a dirt road 7 miles from a town most people drive through without stopping, and reach their conclusions before they ever thought to ask what I had been doing with the previous 40 years. The answer was in the walls of that farmhouse. It was in every sealed thing nobody else thought worth opening. There is more in the old places than people expect. More in the barns with the rusted locks. More in the cellars where the mason jars have gone dusty on the shelves. More in the ledgers stacked in the back of a drawer. In the field notebooks tied with twine. In the tin canisters pushed behind the plaster because someone, a long time ago, understood that what they knew was worth keeping. You may know a place like that. You may have opened something, or stood on the edge of opening it and wondered if it was worth the effort. It is. Whatever is in there, it is. If you have found something in an old place nobody else thought worth looking, I would like to know what it was. Leave it in the comments. I'll read every one.